Great. Hi, Amit. So the first question is, Court Square in Long Island City has seen significant residential development, with thousands of new residents and large buildings continue to be built. Although the city's tried to balance the unplanned residential development by promising to reopen the closed library branch in Court Square, as well as budgeting $60 million for the new elementary school, there really hasn't been any progress or updates from SCA or Queens Public Library. As the council member that represents the neighborhood, what concrete specific steps can you do to prevent these scenarios from occurring in the future? And now that we're in the current situation, what concrete specific steps can you do to ensure that the city actually delivers its promise for the new school and to reopen the library branch?
Well, thank you so much, Frank, for having me on with you today. It's honestly a pleasure. And hello to everyone in Court Square from neighboring Sunnyside. Nice to be with you. So Frank, you've asked a couple of very important questions. You know, what we've seen over the course of many years here in Court Square, as well as other parts of the city, is that the city often makes these types of commitments to neighborhoods and to communities, sets expectations, and then the commitments or the expectations are simply not met. There are a few reasons for this. Number one, sometimes there are just enormous delays with respect to these types of community investments because of New York City's procurement process. Here in New York City, we're blessed in some ways to have one of the most stringent procurement processes of any municipality in the nation. It has led us to have an incredibly transparent and fraud-free municipal government in many ways, but it has also created enormous delays. And communities need these types of services and this type of assistance now. We can't wait years and years for school seats. We can't wait years and years for library branches to reopen. So we do need a little bit of a revisiting of some of our procurement processes to make sure that when it comes to these types of very clear-cut community investments, that we can shorten the timelines. That will require some legislation. It will require some changes to the rules, which will have to be done by the next administration as well. But these are some important sort of changes to the process that I think will help ensure that these commitments can be delivered on. That's number one. Number two is that we have to recognize that the city council plays an enormous role in the city's budgeting process. Every single year before the city's budget is actually adopted, the city council has to vote on it. It has to actually become a matter of law. And so as a result of that, the city council gets to have quite a bit of say in terms of what that budget looks like, and extracting very specific timelines from the mayoral administration on when and how these community assets are going to be built, when they're going to be delivered, when they're going to be open as part of the budget process. Baking that into the legislation that is passed to actually approve the budget is an important approach that needs to be considered. Very often, historically, this hasn't been considered because the budget gets introduced sometime in April. Generally, it has to be passed by June 30th. And there are a million different things that we need to negotiate on. But really making sure that very specific community projects are at the top of the priority list for me as a city council member, as part of the budget negotiations, would be my approach, because we can't just sit back and expect that things are going to get done unless we are advocating for them every single day.
Definitely. No, thank you so much. It's New York City. Nothing's easy. So the second question is, District 26 is made up of many diverse neighborhoods that are typically pretty segregated. Today, families in one neighborhood can live, eat, work, and send their children to different schools than other families in the district. Since these communities often don't intersect, you end up with perspectives with one neighborhood describing Long Island City as filled with ghost towers. And then the other perspective is Long Island City is too overcrowded with the lack of school seats, infrastructure for sewage and public space. As the elected official representing the district, how do you reconcile these perspectives in different communities to kind of ensure better community connectivity, but also overall representation for the district?
Absolutely. When I look at Long Island City, I do personally see a thriving and very diverse community, as we know. But it has many different components to it. Waterfront Long Island City is decidedly different than Court Square, which is, of course, decidedly different than Dutch Kills. People can argue whether that's part of a story or Long Island City. And of course, we have our incredible NYCHA communities of Queensbridge and Ravenswood. Each of these communities has very much their own existing needs when it comes to dealing with issues of poverty or infrastructure or education. But one of the things that we see in Long Island City, from my perspective, that has maybe historically been a little bit of a barrier to people feeling like it is truly an integrated community is just the built environment, right? The way Long Island City actually has been designed, because it wasn't originally designed primarily for residential use, has created a situation in which different parts of the overall neighborhood feel like they are a little bit disconnected from each other. So I think first and foremost, we need to really think about how changes to the built environment can actually help break down some of those otherwise maybe invisible barriers, right? An approach here to me is an aggressive expansion of protected bike lanes across the neighborhood. If you look at Long Island City right now, you'll see that certain parts of the neighborhood have certain types of bike lanes, other parts of the neighborhood have other types of bike lanes, many parts don't have any at all. If you look at certain parts of Long Island City, excuse me just one second. My apologies.
No worries.
If you look at other parts of Long Island City, the bike lanes don't even intersect. They don't necessarily intersect with transit. And so one of the things that I think would really be a boon in terms of working towards a city, a neighborhood that feels more integrated, is having an actual built environment and an infrastructure that allows for that type of integration and more seamless movement, physical movement from within across the neighborhood. The other issue here, right, and as someone, I say this as someone who is a very proud graduate of New York City public schools, almost my entire life, just an intervening year or two when I lived outside of New York City very briefly, where I didn't go to New York City public schools. I went through the public school system at a time when it was less segregated and it was more integrated and it was more diverse. I say this as an alum of a gifted and talented program. I say this as an alum of one of the specialized high schools. And it is really concerning to me that we have seen, in recent years, a real increase in segregation in our public school system. And there are many different components and inputs and reasons for this. There isn't just, one cause. But I do believe that redrawing school district lines such that they are bringing in multiple and diverse communities together, such that folks from many different backgrounds can easily have access to the same zone school, is really critical. To ensuring that we're not starting what feels like social segregation at a very early age for our youngest people, who then begin to take on some of these ideas even unwittingly, right? And they perpetuate, later in life. But also to ensure that we are providing a high quality of education for all of our kids, right? I fundamentally believe that when our kids are learning together, everyone is learning better, and they're learning better not just in the classroom, but also from the lived experiences of their peers. So it's really important to me that thinking about school integration, particularly in Long Island City, is a tool that we are utilizing to make sure that we are really ensuring that the neighborhood is as integrated and as thriving as it can be.
Great. No, thank you. So just two more questions. The third question is, when Court Square was first envisioned, it was meant to be a commercial area, an extension of Midtown East. However, a lot of the developments end up being large residential high rises, as we know. Today, Court Square is being positioned as a mixed use neighborhood with some significant commercial developments in place, like the Jacks, which is 1 million square foot of office space, a new bio life science building, and the Citibank Altice Tower still there. What are your perspectives on diversifying the building mix, commercial businesses within Court Square specifically, and if applicable, with what government tools, policies, or incentives or otherwise?
Sure. I think one of the things that we have failed on as a city, as sort of a general matter when it comes to creating employment, is really thinking about the nature of that employment. Is it employment with dignity? Are these jobs that are being created jobs that pay enough wages such that, the people who are perhaps at the quote lowest end can actually have one job? Are there jobs where we are requiring that the employers are providing skills-based training? Are there jobs that are providing all the access to protection and benefits that workers deserve? Are there jobs, wherever appropriate, that are providing a path to unionization? And I think our economic development approach and our economic development policy in New York City under different and multiple administrations has really, failed a little bit on this front in thinking about how do we create a truly diverse and prepared workforce that can, in fact, take on all of the economic needs of the future, but also benefit from the types of economic development that we should be having equitably, right, and comprehensively. And I think ground zero for that in some ways has been Long Island City and Court Square. And so one of the things that I would, want to really focus on if I'm a council member is utilizing just even the bully pulpit of this office and the power that the city council has writ large over land use to make sure that the types of employment that we are creating meets a whole variety of basic stipulations when it comes to wages, when it comes to protections and benefits, and that we are saying, we want employers to come and create jobs here in Western Queens, but we want those jobs to be accessible to everyone. We want those jobs to be jobs that people can start in and then grow in. And we want those jobs to be ones that truly allow for a diverse and thriving middle class. Because if we can't guarantee New York City as a city of economic opportunity for all New Yorkers, then we're not really delivering on the promise of New York City. And the promise of New York City has been from its earliest days that it is a place where people come from all over the country and all over the world to build a better life for themselves and their families. And just, in closing for this question, I want to say this is something deeply personal to me. My parents came to New York City 50 years ago from 10,000 miles away. They had a couple of degrees in their pockets, but really not a dollar to their names. And they were able to build a thriving life for themselves and their family here in New York City. And I had the best that our public school system had to offer because New York City was a place that was affordable for them. It was a place that they were able to build equity. It was a place where they were able to have jobs that paid them enough and allowed them to grow into their careers. And, they didn't get super wealthy, but they did well enough. And, I want to make sure that absolutely every single family in New York City has an opportunity to provide that to their kids.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. So the last question is, and I know this question was asked to you in March, was, who would be your ranked choice vote for number 2 within this election in city council? And if you don't have a choice yet, that's okay. But I think people would also, a bonus question would be, could you let us know your ranked choice votes for the next mayor of New York City? I think both would be helpful to people.
Great. Look, I will say, I think there are a number of candidates running in this race who are quality candidates, people with whom I share values, progressive values, bold progressive vision for the city when it comes to a fair economy for all, when it comes to the expansion of publicly funded healthcare, particularly since we have no such facilities in this district, when it comes to creating deeply and permanently affordable housing, requiring that all of our public land is used exclusively for public good, when it comes to fighting climate change, retrofitting our entire building stock to make sure that we're really tackling emissions here in New York City, right? Building emissions are 70% of all of the emissions that we are experiencing here. So really protecting New York against climate change means disincentivizing the use of carbon and really putting New Yorkers back to work in good jobs to retrofit our building stock. These are values that a lot of candidates share. But I think what sets me apart from every other candidate in this race is that I am the only person in this race, a very crowded field with nearly 15 years of experience in government, making New York City's government work for its working people, whether it was directly helping 1,000 immigrant families get their green cards and become citizens, whether it was writing nearly 4 dozen laws to lift the floor for immigrants, workers, and consumers, things like paid sick leave for 3 million New Yorkers, the nation's first law to protect freelancers, or whether it was securing the city's political and economic future by being at the helm of New York City's unprecedented $40 million census campaign, which saved the state an entire congressional seat when we were slated to lose 2. I'm really proud of this record. It is a record that sets me apart from my competitors, many of whom I have great respect for. I don't have a number 2 at this point in the race. But there are certainly some folks I've worked with and folks I respect, and no matter the outcome of the race, I certainly be able to work with them in a community building capacity into the future. With respect to the mayoral race, look, I didn't watch the entire debate last night. I had my own things to do for my campaign, but obviously it is something I've been following very closely. I happen to have personal relationships and professional relationships with 3 of the candidates in the race, based on my many years of experience. So, as a matter of ethics and professional and personal just respect for everyone involved. I am not making endorsement in the mayoral race. And, I won't be publicly talking about, who I'm ranking and how. But what I will say is there are certainly candidates in that race whose values I do not share. One candidate in particular that I do think bears mentioning that I'm very disappointed in, and I do want to talk about this for a second, is Sean Donovan. This is someone whose record in many ways I've respected to the extent that I think he did accomplish a number of important things, particularly during his time in Washington. But his record in New York City has been a really, really terrible one. The immense amount of market rate explosion that we've seen in our residential market is directly the cause, and the immense amount of gentrification that multiple neighborhoods in New York City have experienced, including here in New York and right here in Western Queens, are a direct cause of his failed housing policies that have pushed Black, Brown, Asian, immigrant New Yorkers out of their homes, have made huge swaths of New York City completely unlivable for working New Yorkers. I think that the directions that he is proposing in terms of where he wants to take the city, particularly on issues of housing and homelessness, are deeply flawed, and I would be very concerned if he is our next mayor. Other than that, I'm very proud to say that I think there are three fantastic women candidates, all of whom bring various strengths to the table. Certainly, I'm probably a little bit more ideologically aligned with some versus others, but I think each of them really has a lot to recommend them. And, I think the city would be well served by any one of those three.
Perfect. Thank you so much.